Okay, we're live. Um, let's just give it a bit more time for people to chime in. Dimitri, this is one of our first live streams in over like 2 weeks, I feel. We've been out for quite some time. On my end, I was in Belgrade, Serbia, just last week or 2 weeks ago, where I published a report on the anniversary of the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. It was quite an experience chatting with people who lived the NATO's bombing campaign of Yugoslavia, as well as I spoke to a retired colonel of the Yugoslav army who spoke about the um, the use of depleted uranium by NATO, which has led to extreme cases of, or a disproportionate case of cancer among, ironically, NATO soldiers and residents of this of uh, of Kosovo. Um, Dimitri, you've published a couple of reports as well.
Yeah, mostly reporting on what is going on in West Asia and in particular Trump's efforts or so-called efforts to bring the Ukraine war to an end. As I've been explaining on Reason to Resist in the last couple of weeks and on numerous other platforms where I've been interviewed, I've come to the conclusion that this, I hope I'm wrong, but that this peace initiative is another Donald Trump scam. And we'll touch on that today, sort of elaborate on that. So you'll be going off to the People's Republic of China, Rami, to
Yes.
do some reporting. Why don't you
Yes.
talk a little bit?
On April 15th, I'll be flying to China for the Canton Fair, which is the largest trade fair in the world. Nearly every single Chinese manufacturer and importer attends this conference, which is basically a 3 weeks long business fair. I'll be documenting the situation there, considering we're in heightened economic trade war between the United States and China, and maybe United States and the entire world. So I'll be documenting that, and I'm also hoping to visit other cities in China, such as Chengdu in the Sichuan province, as well as Chongqing, which is the largest city in the world in terms of, I believe, population. Um, and I'll be spending some time in Guangzhou, as I said, for the Canton Fair, Shenzhen, Foshan. And I'm also hoping to get to Urumqi, the Xinjiang province, and to document how life is there, since there's been a lot of claims by the Western government. I think there's no better way of knowing what's going on there than to see with our own eyes, especially since we have this opportunity to do so. We're gonna start fairly soon, but there's also one thing I was quite shocked to read about this morning is that Hungary exited the International Criminal Court in order to allow Netanyahu to come visit Budapest. So that's one of the many headlines going on that is, at this point, nothing is shocking, but yeah. Dimitri, anything else?
Yeah, one of the interviews I did on another platform last week, I was talking about Orban and saying that, he gets a free pass from a lot of people in the anti-imperialist media because he, admirably has argued for bringing the Ukraine war to an end. But all the people who commend him for that, not all of them, but most of them don't mention the fact that he is fanatically supportive of Israel's genocidal regime. And I think today we just saw the most dramatic demonstration of that imaginable. He's pulling his country out of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court to host a war criminal on his soil when he should be arresting him. So I'm no fan of Viktor Orban, let me tell you. I think he's treated with some kid gloves by some of our colleagues in the anti-imperialist movement. Hopefully that'll change now. In any event, I just also want to mention that I plan to be going to Iran in early May to attend the Sobe Media Festival. I've never been to Iran before. I'm hoping that the country won't be attacked anytime soon. We'll be getting into that, but subject to any shenanigans by the United States military and Israel. That's currently my plan. So I'm very much looking forward to that trip and learning more about the country. So why don't we get started, Rami? And by the way, I just should mention we have to limit our program today to 1 hour because Rami and I both have other commitments we can't avoid. So we're going to try to leave at least 20 minutes for the Q&A and hopefully a little more than that.
Yeah.
So
just before you start, I just wanted to also say that to do this kind of reporting that we're doing on the ground costs us a bit of money. So if you feel that you're in a possibility to drop some super chats on this YouTube chat box or to subscribe to our Patreon, it would be extremely helpful.
So we're going to start by talking about the tariffs. And interestingly, just as Rami was mentioning, our need for funding to enable us to continue doing on-the-ground reporting from around the global south, an alert popped up on my screen from the Toronto Star and said, Trump tariffs throw stock markets into chaos. So stock markets opened up in North America, I guess about an hour and a half ago. I haven't had an opportunity to view what's going on, but chaos doesn't sound like a good thing. In any event, yesterday, April 2nd, Donald Trump unveiled 54% tariffs on all Chinese imports into the US. And so, Rami, thank you for that. You'll see this is a CNN article. China's, the People's Republic of China, their government did not respond, surprisingly, in a positive manner to this extraordinary act of economic aggression. Its Ministry of Commerce responded this morning, a few hours ago, by stating, quote, China firmly opposes this and will resolutely take countermeasures to safeguard its own rights and interests. The Ministry of Commerce slammed the move as, quote, typical unilateral bullying practice, close quote, while urging the U.S. to cancel the tariffs and properly resolve differences with its trading partners through equal dialogue. Trump announced its announcement on Wednesday. What it actually did was add 34% tariffs. He calls them reciprocal tariffs to existing 20% duties on all Chinese imports to the U.S. that he has already instituted since he returned to the White House. He did that in two tranches of 10%. So 10 plus 10 plus 34 equals 54%. And the White House said this was necessary to stem the flow of illicit fentanyl from China to the U.S. I don't know about you folks, but I'm not buying that one at all. I would be very surprised if there is a significant flow of fentanyl from the People's Republic of China, which is halfway across the world, into the U.S. Also, as I understand it, the Chinese authorities are very strict about the drug trade. So there's something else going on here, and we're going to get into that now. Before I do that, I just want to say Beijing responded to the initial tariffs. I just said, there were two initial rounds of 10% each by imposing retaliatory tariffs on a range of U.S. imports, including agricultural products and fuel. It also took certain action against American firms by ramping up export controls. So Trump explained the tariffs as follows. I have great respect for President Xi of China, great respect for China, but they are taking tremendous advantage of us. They understand exactly what's happening, and they're going to fight. Now, I just want to pause there and say that doesn't sound like a fentanyl emergency to me. It sounds like what he's alleging is that China's engaging in somehow an unfair trade, which has nothing to do with fentanyl. And Trump, of course, as is usual, doesn't provide any evidence to back up this allegation. As a general matter, it seems to me Chinese exporters are simply more competitive than US producers. When the US is winning a trade competition, it insists that the rules of the game be respected. When it's losing, as it is decisively with respect to China, it complains that the rules are unfair. And this attitude, I think, really highlights the fact that we don't live in a regime of free trade, as they call it. Rather, it's rigged trade, and it is designed to benefit a Western-based oligarchy, not the people of Western countries, but the oligarchy that rule over these countries. And I also want to say that rigged trade in the United States is a bipartisan affair. Trump instituted tariffs on China for the same bogus reasons during his first administration, and Biden left them in place. So it's not like this is all being driven by Trump. Now, these tariffs are likely to have dramatic impacts on both the US and Chinese economies. Rami, if you could pull up image 2. That's number 1.
That should be, oops.
There you go. And you'll see, so this is a ranking of the top trading partners of the United States by import value in 2024. And Mexico is number 1 at 506 billion. That's the annual amount of value of the value of annual imports from Mexico into the United States. China is not far behind at 439 billion, followed by Canada at 413 billion. And they are by far the 3 largest exporters to the United States. So with trade in that quantity between China and the US, and a lot of that trade is electronic goods, which Americans have become accustomed to using in their day-to-day lives from morning till night. So this is going to have potentially very dramatic impacts on both of the economies of China and the United States. And hence, as I just mentioned, the stock markets are apparently descending into chaos. Now, given the high stakes in this trade war, one would think that Trump should have to obtain congressional approval before implementing these tariffs. But Trump thinks he has found a way to bypass Congress. So this brings us back to the question of fentanyl. Why is Trump using fentanyl as a justification for these enormous tariffs? The reason is that Trump thinks that invoking the fentanyl crisis empowers him under a piece of legislation I'm going to talk about in a second to impose tariffs without congressional approval. That legislation gives certain extraordinary powers to the President of the United States in an emergency situation. So Trump needs to come up with an emergency in order to justify imposing these tariffs on countries without congressional approval. And the emergency he's come up with is the fentanyl crisis. I don't think he really particularly cares about the many Americans who suffer from a fentanyl addiction. That is a genuine crisis. I think he's cynically using that crisis in order to avoid Congress. Could you pull up image 3, Rami? And you'll see here an organization called Lawfare has described the use of this legislation by Trump for tariff purposes as an abuse of power. The legislation in question is called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. The IEEPA, as Lawfare explains, does not explicitly grant tariff authority at all. Indeed, the words duty or tariff appear nowhere in the statute. So already, even putting aside the question of whether there's an emergency that would justify this, there's a question about whether the statute authorizes the imposition of tariffs, even if there is an emergency. Moreover, to the extent that the IEEPA grants power to the president to impose tariffs, and it's unclear that it does, the legislation requires that there be a direct connection between the action taken, so here the action is broad-based tariffs, and the properly declared national emergency. Well, what is the direct connection between imposing 54% tariffs on all Chinese goods coming into the United States and the fentanyl crisis? There's a lot of, I mean, if you want to take the position that, I don't know, they're stashing fentanyl in some of those, containers that are coming over from China, well, you would target the particular, transport method for bringing the fentanyl in. And I'm not even sure there is significant quantities of fentanyl coming from China by any means. But to go to the point of imposing 54% tariffs on all goods, coming in from China to get a handle on the fentanyl crisis is an extraordinary stretch, it seems to me. So I very much doubt if there's a legal challenge to this, and if the court is, enforcing the law impartially, that it will find Donald Trump to have, legitimately invoked this piece of legislation. But that remains to be seen. A lot of those judges are sympathetic to Trump's agenda now because he's appointed a lot of them. So we'll just have to see whether there is a legal challenge and if so, how that plays out. One other thing I want to say is it's quite striking that Trump is, employing this highly dubious technique for bypassing Congress, even though the Republican Party controls both the Senate and the House of Representatives. This suggests that Trump does not have confidence that the Republicans in the House and the Senate will support his tariffs. The last thing I want to say is that I myself think that, I don't want to sound like I'm just, viscerally opposed to tariffs. I'm not. I think, intelligently employed tariffs done for the purpose of protecting domestic industries, particularly industries that produce goods and services that are vital to the well-being of the populace, is a good thing, but I don't see that Trump he has any kind of a well thought out strategy here. And imposing tariffs in and of themselves is not sufficient. I've had discussions with economist Kostas Lapavitsas about this on our global economy report in the last couple of months. If you want to, repatriate industries that have left your jurisdiction to go to a low-cost jurisdiction like China, well, you're going to have to do more than, impose tariffs. I think, especially if you want to ensure that, they're producing the goods and services that will have to be replaced because they're now too costly, the ones coming from China, in a manner that is safe and effective. You need to invest as a government in developing, redeveloping, and resurrecting those domestic industries. And there's simply no impetus, as far as I can tell, on the Trump administration, on the part of the Trump administration, to make the necessary public investments in rebuilding the industrial base of the United States. So again, we'll just have to see where all of this leads. But one thing's for sure, it's going to cause a lot of economic havoc in the near term. Now, it's not just the economic war between the US and China that is heating up. Military tensions are rising as well. And Rami has just put up on the screen a CNN article. Over the last couple of days, China's military has engaged in live fire exercises around Taiwan, in the Strait of Taiwan. Interestingly, the PRC's forces did not confine themselves to the waters between Taiwan and mainland China. If you could pull up image 5, Rami, we can show our friends a map. You'll see there that if you look at the pink shading area, they effectively surrounded Taiwan. And they didn't simply employ naval vessels. They were also using land-based units, artillery, and multiple launch rocket systems on the coast of China, mainland China, in these live fire exercises. And the significant number of combat aircraft were also involved. Effectively, I think China is sending a powerful message that it will not tolerate any interference by the Trump administration in what it rightly regards as its internal affairs, because under international law, Taiwan is part of the People's Republic of China. Now, the response from the Trump administration to these naval exercises, these military exercises, was, predictably bellicose. If you could pull up image 6, Rami, this would be a comment from U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. You'll see at the very bottom there, Hegseth was just leaving for Asia, where he promised, quote, credible deterrence, close quote, by the U.S. against China in the Indo-Pacific. What he means by that is anyone's guess. I would note, however, that with the U.S. military surging into West Asia as it threatens Iran, and with the Trump administration continuing to supply Ukraine with weapons, while U.S. weapons stocks are depleted, and there's no end in sight for the Ukraine war at this time, it's difficult to see what credible deterrence of a non-nuclear nature the United States can apply here. There's been lots of discussion over the years by military experts, particularly people with the veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, people like Ray McGovern, Lawrence Wilkerson, Scott Ritter, that even 2 major wars would be an extraordinary strain on the United States. If the United States was not only embroiled in a war with Iran and supplying Ukraine with enormous amounts of munitions, because that's what Ukraine is required to consume in that war, I can't imagine that it would be in any position to defend Taiwan meaningfully, even if it was the only military challenge that the United States was confronting, preventing a military takeover of Taiwan by the People's Republic of China. That in and of itself would be a huge challenge, because Taiwan is just off the coast of mainland China, but it's a long way away from the United States. And the United States would have tremendous logistical challenges in maintaining any kind of military operation to prevent China from militarily seizing control of Taiwan. In a situation where it's not only confronting those logistical challenges, but is also waging a war against Iran and supplying Ukraine with weaponry, I think that would be, I don't know if I would use the word collapse to describe what that would do to the United States military, but it would certainly be an extraordinarily difficult situation for the already overstretched U.S. military. And I have to say that if the U.S. becomes mired at the same time in 2 major wars in Ukraine and West Asia, the People's Republic of China's leadership hasn't really indicated in any way, I think, that it wants a military resolution of this. I think it's been very patient, even as the U.S. has provided billions of dollars of weaponry to Taiwan, has trained its military forces, has made a lot of noises about, quote unquote, coming to the defense of Taiwan militarily if China attempts to seize control by military means. The PRC has refrained from attacking military forces on Taiwan for decades. But still, one would think that there would be no more opportune a moment for the Chinese military to intervene than a situation where the United States is embroiled at the same time in 2 major wars, one in Ukraine and one with Iran. Hopefully, if they feel that temptation, they won't succumb to it. But I think that the United States is playing, in so many ways, a very, very dangerous game right now. And these military exercises were not, of course, the only ones that have happened in recent weeks that involved China. Rami, if you could pull up image 7, you'll see that for the 5th year in a row, last month, Iran, Russia, and China conducted joint naval drills in the Gulf of Oman. And both China and Russia have declared their partnership with Iran to be of strategic importance. In January of this year, 3 days before Trump returned to the White House, Iran and Russia signed a strategic partnership agreement in Moscow. And I want to spend a couple of minutes telling you about that agreement. It's quite interesting. The preamble of the agreement states relying on deep historical ties between the Iranian and Russian people, proximity of their cultures and spiritual and moral values, commonality of interests, strong ties of good neighborliness, and broad opportunities for cooperation in political, economic, military, cultural, humanitarian, scientific, technical, and other fields. And then it says, desiring to contribute to an objective process of shaping a new, just, and sustainable multipolar world order based on sovereign equality of states, good faith cooperation, mutual respect for interests, collective solutions to international problems, cultural and civilizational diversity, the rule of international law in accordance with the UN Charter, including the renunciation of the threat or use of force, non-interference in internal affairs, and respect for the territorial integrity of both states. That's just some of what the preamble states. Now, this agreement does not contain a provision like Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which calls upon NATO member states to consider coming to each other's defense in the event that one of them is attacked. But I'll show you what it does contain. Rami, if you could pull up image 8. So the closest that it comes to having an Article 5 type NATO provision is paragraph 3 of Article 3. So you're looking at the first 3 articles of the Iran-Russia agreement. And what it says is, in the event that either contracting party, this is the highlighted text, is subject to aggression, the other contracting party shall not provide any military or other assistance to the aggressor, which would contribute to the continued aggression, and shall help to ensure that the differences that have arisen are settled on the basis of the United Nations Charter and other applicable rules of international law. So it doesn't spell out what that help would look like. It certainly doesn't say that it would be of a military nature. So it doesn't quite rise to the level, I think you can say confidently, of the Article 5 obligation under the Treaty of NATO. But I've quoted to you some language from the preamble, and I also, I think it's worth noting that the word military appears 12 times in the Iran-Russia Strategic Partnership Agreement. And if you could pull up, I think, one other article that is of interest, if you could pull up Article 5, thank you, Rami. This specifically relates to military cooperation. In order to develop military cooperation between their relevant agencies, the contracting parties shall conduct the preparation and implementation of respective agreements within the Working Group on Military Cooperation. And you'll see in the second paragraph of Article 5, the military cooperation shall cover a wide range of issues, including the exchange of military and expert delegations, port calls by military ships, training of military personnel, exchange of cadets and instructors, and so forth. And then there's talk about joint military exercises. So I think that this agreement, it strikes me as a lawyer looking at, knowing how, agreements end up the way they're drafted. I think that the two sides were trying to send a powerful message to the United States that there will be military cooperation in the event of a U.S. attack on Iran. But they're being quite restrained in spelling that out and specifying the form and nature of military cooperation that would occur in that instance. And of course, it hardly needs to be said that signing the agreement 3 days before in Moscow, 3 days before Trump returned to the White House, that too was intended to send a message. Timing the timing of events such as these, where the parties can dictate the timing, is really never coincidental. So I don't know that Trump got the memo on that one. Now, China also has a strong interest in defending the sovereignty of Iran. You'll see here that this is an article, March 10th, from Oil Price Change. It says the tightened U.S. sanctions on Iranian oil flows under the Trump administration have created chaos in Iran's oil exports to its single biggest buyer. China's its single biggest buyer. China accounts for 90% of the Islamic Republic's oil. And so this is a matter of significant concern, I would imagine, to the authorities of the PRC. And if you imagine a situation where Iran's current government were to be replaced by a US puppet like the Shah of Iran, in all likelihood, there really would be no effective resistance at that point to US domination of West Asia. And I can't think of a time in the entire post-World War II period where there has never been any resistance, any effective resistance to US domination of West Asia. You know, by one, the United States has eliminated the governments that were opposed to US hegemony. Whether you like them or not, and I certainly don't, I'm not a fan, but you know, the governments of Saddam Hussein and Bashar al-Assad, for all of their flaws, they were not inclined to be mere vassals of the United States government. You know, of course, they destroyed really the government of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. They are trying to destroy Hezbollah and Ansar Allah. And if you take Iran out of the equation, what military force or governmental authority in West Asia will put up any kind of meaningful resistance to US domination of the world's richest oil producing region? China is not only a major buyer, the largest buyer by far of Iranian oil, it is also the largest customer of Saudi Arabia. And I think China must be asking if, you know, the US had total control of West Asia, in such circumstances, could it force Saudi Arabia to curtail its oil sales to China? I would imagine it would be at least easier for it to do so if there was no kind of resistance whatsoever to US hegemony in the region. So, you know, in the case of Russia, I interviewed John Helmer, a journalist who spent a long time in Russia, has a lot of expertise in Russia. And he said that going all the way back to the era of Stalin, the Russian authorities were concerned that the United States could use Iran as a launching pad for an attack on southwestern Russia. So, and also this strategic partnership agreement provides for the development of a trade corridor from the Russian Federation through the Caspian Sea to Iran. So there's a lot of reasons why Russia, even though it has ample oil and gas for its own needs, would want to ensure that the United States does not succeed in any kind of a regime change operation in Iran. And the last thing I want to say, Rami, before we open it up to questions, is I think that this this attempt by the Trump administration to achieve, or purportedly to achieve, peace in Ukraine. My guess is that what's really driving all of this, you know, playing nice with the Russians that we're seeing from Washington, is that they want to persuade the Russians to stand aside in the event of a U.S. attack on Iran. And so partly, I think it's to do what they can to keep Russia out of it. But also, if the United States is forced to supply large amounts of munitions to Ukraine at a time when its weapon stocks are depleted because of all of the weaponry it has given to Ukraine and to Israel during the last several years, it's going to have a hell of a time supplying its own military in the case of a full-blown war with Iran. So the United States, as a logistical, practical matter, has a strong incentive to ensure the cessation of hostilities, not necessarily a lasting peace, but just a cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire, even if it's only a temporary one, in Ukraine, so that it can focus its remaining weapon stocks and arsenal on Iran. I think that's clear. It has a strong incentive, and I think that may be all that's going on. And so this would explain why Russia is so focused on just getting a ceasefire as quickly as possible. I think they've articulated a deadline for Iran to capitulate to whatever the demands the U.S. is making by April 20th. I think that's the deadline. In other words, the implication being, and Trump has said specifically, we're going to bomb Iran into oblivion. So if that's the deadline, they're definitely going to want to get a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, so that they'll stop bleeding weaponry to that theater of conflict. That's why I say that I think this is all a scam. I think that what Donald Trump is really doing here is simply trying to secure a temporary cessation of fighting in Ukraine so that he can focus his military's guns on the Islamic Republic. I hope I'm wrong. I really would love to see that war come to an end for all the reasons we've talked about on Reason to Resist. I, at the outset of this second Trump administration, despite my having a very, very negative opinion of Donald Trump, that's never changed, I actually had an open mind about whether or not he was serious. I didn't assume that this was fakery. But based on all that I've seen now, that's the conclusion I've come to, Rami. I think that this is a scam. So before we turn it over to Q&A, I invite you to add any thoughts you have to all of that.
So on the topic of China, one of the reasons why I'm specifically going to this Canton Fair is because there's been a lot of uncertainty by Chinese manufacturers around what would trade look like with Trump being in power, especially with the heightened tariffs and the hostility that has been going on. So, I mean, this is definitely something that I should maybe take a look at as well. Maybe try to see how close we could get to Taiwan and see what kind of military exercises we could see, because you mentioned the Chinese ones, but the Americans also, like American Canada, navigates nuclear submarines between the Taiwan Strait. So that should be something that we should definitely keep an eye on. I mean, for the case of Iran, what's been truly on my mind was mostly the discussions from like so-called geopolitical analysts on Twitter. We saw some of the comments here on this chat saying that Scott Ritter saying that Iran made their bed, and there's been people kind of parroting a bit the State Department's messaging when it comes to Iran, basically endorsing the ultimatum. And there's been some very nice discussions, especially from, let me see if I can pull up a little tweet here. Oops. From Sony Tang, it's a very nice interaction. Maybe I should pin it into the description of this chat here, but it's kind of I'm not sharing the screen actually. It's kind of the two sides over here, right? So the people that are standing in solidarity with the Iranian people, who understand the sovereignty of Iran, and understanding that like Iran did sign a nuclear arms treaty, or not nuclear arms treaty, but an agreement in terms of the enrichment of uranium, and the Americans single-handedly withdrew from it. So there's a lot of people within the Iranian system that are skeptic of any further deal with the United States. And it seems like no matter if there's a deal or not, and even if the conditions that are presented to Iran should most likely be unacceptable, we note that America is specifically looking to start a military intervention in Iran due to Iran's, as you've mentioned, not bowing down to American pressure, and also for their support of Palestine and their continuous support for the people in Gaza that are resisting. I think there was 252 bombers that were sent over to the Diego Garcia base that is kind of at the coast of the Persian Gulf and the kind of the eastern coast of Africa. And there's also been some quite interesting findings around the specific Diego base, and it's due to the fact that the British ethnically cleansed that island to use it as a joint military base between the Americans and the UK. So I think like when we look at what's going on in Iran and what's going on, it kind of exposes really the tentacles of the American military and how it weaponizes oceans, waterways, to push its hegemony on people. So I think in these types of times, it's important to fully be in solidarity with Iran and to not let them bow down. I mean, they won't bow down, but to not let the discourse go in such a way where we're having people on Twitter, such as Scott Ritter, forcing Iran to bow down.
Yeah. Could you show the Ritter tweet to it, because not everybody may have seen it. The one to which Sony is responding.
Yeah, so there's the one. It's Scott Ritter saying your entire premise is premised on the hypothetical that Iran says it has no intention of undertaking the possession of nuclear weapons, which makes your entire argument nonsensical. I'm surprised you don't see this. You can't be more Iranian than the Iranians who don't want a nuclear bomb, no matter how much you want them to. And I'm curious, I mean, then he's going on these ad hominem attacks. I mean, you should all check out Sony Tang's Twitter posts and his Twitter account. I think he's shown extreme composure in countering Scott Ritter and truly has made a mockery out of Scott Ritter, in my opinion.
Yeah, so this is a long thread there. What started all of this was, I'm going to summarize it. I also got involved at one point in this conversation, as did, by the way, Professor Mohammed Marandi from the University of Tehran, who has been on our program before. He took exception to what Ritter was saying. Ritter was basically saying, whether I don't agree that the United States has a right to attack Iran for having a peaceful nuclear program, but the reality is that that's what it might do. And so what Iran should do, just from the point of view of self-preservation, is I think the way he put it was put its nuclear program on the table. In other words, be willing to negotiate it away, or at least reduce it substantially. When I responded to this, we won't look for my response now because it'll take too much time, but what I basically said was, putting aside the morality of what you're saying, the fact of the matter is that this isn't about Iran's nuclear program, because the United States intelligence agencies themselves have assessed that Iran is not trying to develop a nuclear weapon. It doesn't have one. It's not trying to do that. It was complying with the JCPOA. What this really is about is neutering Iran. They want to take away Iran's ballistic missile capability, the conventional missiles, the hypersonic missiles, because they can clearly penetrate American and Israeli air defenses. They want Iran to stop supporting resistance groups in the region. They want basically Iran to be forced into a position of servitude where it's just a passive bystander to whatever crimes the United States and Israel commit. And I think that that's the main problem with Scott Ritter's argument. He seems to be convinced that if Iran makes some more concessions around its nuclear program, then the Americans and the Israelis will leave it alone. I think that's complete nonsense. They want Iran nullified, completely nullified, and they won't be satisfied with, more restrictions on its peaceful civil nuclear program.
Dimitri, right after withdrawing from the GCPOA, the United States assassinated Qasem Soleimani. It was never about having a nuclear deal. And if they do sign a nuclear deal, the United States are just going to find another pretext, the same way they found the pretext of fentanyl to start being hostile towards China and to a different extent Canada. So, yeah. I mean, at this point, this is why there's this kind of division within the Iranian government between what some people call hardliners and these reformists, is that I don't really like the word hardliners, but these people understand that there's truly no opportunity to negotiate with the United States because, well, you're basically just signing your death sentence to a certain extent, because the more restrictions they put on you, the more you try to comply with them, the more the United States will just find other avenues to cripple the economy of Iran and to be more hostile towards it.
Precisely. You give them an inch, they'll take a mile. So that's exactly what I think is going on here.
We should open the floor for some Q&A. Let's make sure to put a question mark in the beginning or something just to make it more noticeable that it's a question. And Dimitri, you're currently in Kalamata? Yes,
I am. And if you haven't been following while we're waiting for any questions to come in, you may be interested in my most recent report from Kalamata, where I talk about a former captain of the Israeli military who has been communicating with me for 8 years. I've never invited any of his communications, but he seems to be very determined to develop some sort of a rapport with me. And he repeatedly asked me for meetings, and most recently, he asked to meet with me in Kalamata. What he was doing here is a mystery, because the guy apparently lives in Ottawa nowadays, where the Israeli embassy to Canada is situated. One possibility about why he was here is that just a few kilometers from where I'm sitting, there is a Greek military air base. And at that air base, to the great shame of the Greek government, there is a training center run by Elbit Systems, the murderous Israeli drone manufacturer. And something that's caused me a lot of concern over the last few nights is that late at night, we see these training jets going around the Bay of Kalamata from our home, every weekday during the day. But something really unusual has happened in the last several nights, and that is that we have heard warplanes overhead for several hours at a time. I know the sounds of these planes from my time in South Lebanon and in the West Bank last year and the prior year. So they're doing something very unusual. They are operating warplanes for several hours at a time at night. And while this was going on, again, to the great shame of the Greek government, the Greek prime minister went to Israel on the Sunday of this past weekend to meet with Netanyahu. So what were they discussing? If I had to guess, I'd say one of the subjects, not the only one, but one of the subjects they were discussing was ways in which Greece can assist the Israelis in preparing for an attack on Iran. And if you think this is conspiratorial, this is exactly what the Greek government did in 2023. It was reported by the Israeli press that the Greek government of Kyriakos Mitsotakis authorized the Israeli Air Force to use Greek airspace to practice attacks on Iran. Anyways, I saw, as I was just adding those final thoughts, somebody had a suggestion. I didn't see the name, but somebody had a suggestion for a guest. I find, by the way, the suggestions that come in from our audience about guests that we should have on the program are really good. They're very helpful. So I encourage all of you, whether in this chat or later on, if you have any thoughts about whom we should be interviewing on this program, please, we encourage you to share them with us.
Also, Dimitri, just at our last live stream, you've asked for recommendations of places I should go, and someone said Serbia. So we did honor someone's suggestion. Okay, so we have a couple of questions that came in. Let me go. Oh. Okay, so the first question is, outside of Israel, Iran is home to the largest Jewish community. How do the Zionists square this if the bombs fly? This is from Mr. Max Lyons.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't seem to be particularly concerned about, Jews being killed by their bombs when they implemented the Hannibal Directive on October 7th. The now indicted war criminal, Yoav Gallant, who was the defense minister at that time, said openly on Israeli television a few weeks ago that, yeah, we implemented the Hannibal Directive. We already knew that because the information had leaked out from other sources, but, and look what they're doing now. There's something, I think, like 20 living hostages, military personnel. They're actually prisoners of war, not hostages, in Gaza, and they are bombing the place to smithereens. And I understand the Hamas took the, claimed that after they resumed the bombing a couple of weeks ago, that they killed one or two of the prisoners of war who remain in their custody. So I don't think, they care about the possibility of, Jewish people living in Iran being adversely affected by their war in the country.
Also, just a little note here: Iran is not the largest Jewish community outside of so-called Israel. There's just a little fact check. There's around 10,000 people living there, which is still sizable, but still. But yes, the the point still remains. Then we have a question here, which is from Dana Shit, who says, what are your thoughts on the impact of all of this on the Canadian elections?
Good question, Dana. When you say all of this, I'm assuming you're referring to the tariffs and the military tensions between these countries. I think the tariffs, I'm not sure that the military tensions are having any impact because really the political parties are virtually indistinguishable when it comes to military and foreign policy. They're all supportive of an increase in military spending. They're all supportive of Canada's membership in NATO. They're all supportive of, sending weapons to Ukraine. Not one of the 5 parties represented in Parliament has dissented meaningfully from any of those things. But there's a perception on the part of voters, and this is reflected in recent polls, that the new Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney is better equipped to deal with Trump's tariff war. So that is having an impact. And why they think that, I guess because he was, a Goldman Sachs banker for, I think, 12 years. And then he was the governor of the Bank of Canada and the governor of the Bank of England. So they think he has tremendous, economic expertise. And so he's better situated to do that. That may or may not be correct. But the result of this, I don't think this is the only contributing factor, but as a result of this, in part, the Liberals now have gone from being way behind in the polls, as Dana, you may know, to actually having, in most polls, a significant lead. And some even show that they are on the cusp of getting a majority government. At the end of the day, I don't really know, when it comes to Trump's tariff wars, I don't really know there's going to be any difference whether it's the Conservatives or the Liberals, because the only plan they seem to have is retaliatory tariffs. They're talking about increasing trade with the European Union to replace decreased trade with the United States, but the European Union is itself getting pummeled and is in economic decline. The one thing they're not talking about, which they should be talking about, there's 2 things I think they should be talking about. Number one, why don't they reorient trade towards the BRICS? Why don't we develop détente with China and Russia and India instead of having a belligerent attitude to all 3 countries, and enhance our economic relations with these countries? That's where the economic future lies. And the other thing they should be talking about is all the countries that are being impacted by these tariffs, including the Europeans, is making your country self-sufficient, which is exactly what Russia has done, developing domestically the industries necessary to supply the population with the goods and services that they need for their well-being. There's no discussion about that in Canadian politics, not at the level of the parties in Parliament. It's really such an impoverished discourse we're witnessing right now. All they can talk about is just retaliatory tariffs, nothing else.
And Dimitri, there has been talks about how to deal with China, and that has been to increase tariffs on China to get closer to the United States. So we're delusional at the very core over here, right? Like we're truly not using any inch of leverage that we may have as Canadians.
I just want to quickly show on Mad World 1962, I think, asked if I know Matthew Arrett, and yes, I do know Matthew. We participated in some panels together, and we communicate with each other once in a while. He lives actually, I think, in Montreal, where I spend half my time. He's a very interesting guy, Matthew.
So just one question here from Maria Chalambos, who says, can Zion Donald Trump run again? This is probably because of the context here that Trump has announced that he was looking into ways to run for a 3rd term.
I'm not a U.S. constitutional expert, but the legal consensus has always been that U.S. presidents are constitutionally limited to 2 terms. Now, if I'm not mistaken, was it Roosevelt? Did he do a 3rd term?
Yes, but that was before they put a cap limit on the number of terms you could run.
Oh, really? They amended the Constitution after the Second World War. Interesting.
3 terms and a bit.
Right. Well, I think Maria may be asking the question because Trump apparently was musing to the press about the possibility of having a third term. How he's going to pull that off legally, I don't know.
Okay, then we had is from Ari Magu, who says, is Israel really dictating US moves, military or other?
No. I mean, my opinion, Adi, no. I know that it's a popular view amongst anti-Zionists that Israel controls U.S. decision making at least in the region of West Asia. You know, I am of the. I mean, not because of him. I independently came to my own conclusion that that's not the case. I believe that Israel is effectively America's rabid, not America, the U.S. government's rabid attack dog in the world's richest oil-producing region. I wrote an article about this right after the genocide began. It's entitled, you can find it on my website. It's called "America's Unsinkable Aircraft Carrier is Sinking." I was referring to Israel, and in it, I expressed the view that Israel is a tool and always has been, whereby the U.S. Exercises as much dominance as it can over this region. In the aftermath of the Second World War, U.S. military planners described the oil resources of the region as the greatest material prize in human history and a source of stupendous strategic power. So they set up this colony there to be their unsinkable aircraft carrier in the region. And basically what Israel does is it pummels anyone who exhibits the slightest resistance to U.S. hegemony in the region. It is the rabid attack dog. One person who happens to agree with me from the U.S. military is Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. On the other side of the debate, you have John Mearsheimer, who says, "Oh no, it's all about the lobby, the power of the lobby. Israel controls America." I don't buy that at all. And I see Mad World has another question about the Canadian Patriot Review. That's by Matthew Aaron. I really am not that familiar with it. I get so much reading material thrown my way that I haven't really had time to get up to speed on it. But as I said, I find Matthew to be a very interesting guy, but his views in some respects depart from my own, and others I found he and I are in agreement. That's all I can really add about that.
Maybe we have time for one last question, which is from Alexandra Barnes, who says, does Ritter maybe not want to admit that his own government has never negotiated in good faith? This was related to the discussion of the nuclear energy agreement that the United States is forcing or is trying to get Iran to sign on.
Thanks for the question, Alexandra. I don't think that's what's driving Scott's commentary about Iran, because I've heard him say many times that the U.S. is agreement incapable and that they have no credibility. So to his credit, he's been very critical about the fact that the United States, it's not just the Trump administration, other administrations, the Biden administration, just flout their obligations, their treaty obligations, and their assurances given to the government. One prominent example, of course, is the assurances given by the U.S. government and NATO leadership that NATO would not expand eastward. So I think he's quite willing to acknowledge that nobody trusts the United States government anymore.
And then maybe we could end this one on a lighter note over here. We have a question, which is, what fun and relaxing material do you read to take a break from all of this?
I watched up on YouTube to take a break. I find Jon Stewart on a good day. I find him entertaining. I like looking at older stuff. I really am a big fan of George Carlin. And I think Dave Chappelle. I know Dave is controversial for some reasons, particularly some of the commentary he's made about, the trans community. But he has really incisive commentary about American society. So Dave Chappelle's a pretty funny guy. But reading material, no, nothing that I can think of off the top of my head.
Folks, we're going to wrap this live stream up. Feel free to drop a super chat if you've appreciated this conversation, or to subscribe to our Patreon so that we could keep funding our on-the-ground reporting. I'll be going to China almost in a week from now, and Dimitri to Iran. So there's a lot of content that'll be coming up soon, and we should try to do another live stream next week. Dimitri, anything that I forget to mention?
I'm just going to answer a British Lebanese who asked me if I shook hands with Mossad. I did not shake hands with him, but I did have a beer with him in Montreal once, which was an interesting experience. We get into that another time. But thank you, everybody. We've had people, I can see people from all over the world. It's great to see so much engagement from people from so many different places. And we really appreciate you taking the time to come on the live stream and speak with us.
All right, folks. So we're signing off now. See you next week.
Take care. Peace out.